Welcome to Empowering Homeschool Conversations, your authority in navigating the world of homeschooling diverse learners. Featuring Peggy Ployhar from SPED Homeschool, Annie Yorty from AnnieYorty.com, Leilani Melendez from Living with Eve, Stephanie Buckwalter from eLARP Learning, and Dawn Jackson from Dawn Jackson Educational Consulting and Tutoring. With over 75 years of combined homeschooling expertise, experiences, and perspectives, this group is eager to share their wealth of wisdom to empower your homeschooling journey. So grab your favorite mug, settle in, and get ready for insightful discussions, valuable insights, and practical tips. Give your homeschool the power boost it needs to successfully educate the unique learners in your home.
Welcome back to Empowering Homeschool Conversations, where we explore real-life solutions for families homeschooling unique learners. I'm your host, Peggy Ployhar, and today we're digging into something many of us overlook in our busy parenting lives: how we can help our children feel truly seen and supported by strengthening their connections with the older generation. You may be surprised by how powerful that connection can be, not just for our children, but for the grandparents and the elders in our lives too. To help us unpack this important topic, I'm joined by Isabel Tom, the author of The Value of Wrinkles and creator of the Grandkid Investigation Kit. Isabel brings a rich personal and professional background in senior care, multi-generational living, parent coaching that offers a fresh perspective on honoring and connecting generations. Whether you're navigating tricky in-law dynamics, raising kids who struggle with communication, or just longing to bring more meaning into your family relationships, today's conversation is filled with insight, encouragement, and practical tools. And don't forget, if you're looking for some support, be sure to visit Homeschool Heroes at spedhomeschool.com. We're not meant to walk alone on this journey, so let's all get started. Welcome, Isabel, to the show.
Hi, Peggy. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I would love to know from you just how this all got started with the book and this investigation kit that you created. What's the story?
Well, I mean, I like to tell people it started when I was born, because I was born into a household where, my grandparents lived with our family. I'm the youngest of three girls. And my parents had, intentionally invited my grandparents to live, my mama and yaya, to live with our family, and they had lived in Hong Kong previously. And so I grew up in a multi-generational setting, and I really didn't know that there was anything different.
Right.
It was just, that's how it's always been. And
yeah,
I think growing up, I started to realize that the way that I was growing up was different than a lot of what my peers were experiencing. So I didn't always appreciate it. But my grandpa passed away when he was 98. And my grandma passed away when I was 27. So I lived in the same household with them for the first 26 years of my life. And
that's amazing.
Yeah. And a lot of people don't have the opportunity to have that much time with their grandparents. And so I think because I matured into an adult, I gained an appreciation, and I continue to look back and realize that having my grandparents in my life was just one of the biggest blessings. And then also professionally, my background is working with the older population. And so that has been another way that I feel like God has really blessed me with people who look at me the way that I think that God looks down. He looks at us, just with adoration, and gives us our attention. And so we'll get into that more later, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And just so many benefits. And I'm looking forward to that conversation. So you often say that focus shouldn't just be on what grandparents can do, but what parents can teach their kids about relating to older generations. Why is this shift in thinking so important?
Well, I think that grandparents often are going to be interested in their grandchildren. I mean, especially when they're younger, they're just like over the moon when they see their grandchildren.
Right, exactly.
And want to spend time with them. But I think it's really important for parents to learn how to help their kids connect with grandparents or the older generation in general, because in many ways they're speaking two different languages. They grew up in different environments. They
Right.
don't talk about the same things. They don't even think the same way, and they have a completely different perspective. So when I call the parent the playmaker or the connector, and I think the parents need to know tools and have tools on how to help their kids to connect with their grandparents, because that relationship, I say, it's magical. It's like golden, but it doesn't usually happen naturally.
Yeah, that is true. And just the further you live apart, the harder it is.
Mhm.
And there's just so many things that get in the way. So yeah, definitely. From your Christian perspective, how does faith inform the way we help our children relate to elders?
I think it has everything to do with it. I mean, I will say that growing up, I didn't even think that I didn't connect this to my faith necessarily. Like I said, it was just the way that I grew up. But so my dad was a pastor. He passed in 2015. And
Mm.
I think what I saw is, it was not easy for my parents to live with their parents. Um, but what
Absolutely.
it taught me is that it gave me a real life example of what it means to honor your parents. And I think a lot of times we hear honor
Yes.
your father and mother, and the first thing we think of is like obeying them, right? Like doing what they ask you to do, because as children, that's what we're instructed to obey our parents. But I think
Right.
church, we talk about honoring, but what does it really look like? And so for me, I look back and I see, I lived in this household where not everything was perfect. And sometimes the adults, they clashed. Sometimes there was conflict.
Right.
One person wanted something one way, another person wanted something another way. And that is the reality of the relationships that happen between generations often.
Right.
But I got to see a picture of what it means to truly honor, that it is not easy, but there are things that you can do intentionally to show how to honor your parents. And this is something I think that's really important, because ultimately I can tell my kids to honor their parents, but I think ultimately they're going to learn by watching it. And so that's what has
Yeah.
happened for me. I watched my dad especially honor his parents in doing this hard thing. They lived with my dad lived with his own parents for over 30 years, because they lived for
Wow.
such a long time.
Right.
And what that translated into is it taught my sisters and I, one of the reasons that we took a huge part in caring for my grandparents as they got older near the end of life. I mean, we were very involved. And one of the reasons why we did that is because we saw how it was done. And so nobody asked us and said, hey, can you bring her to the hospital? Can you take her to a doctor's appointment? Can you help cut their toenails? Can you wash their hair? It was just like,
Right.
okay, that's something I can do to honor them. That's something they need help with. And so that's what I
Right.
want my kids to learn, just to actively. Yes, they can't go to a third world country. They can't drive. At least my kids can't. But what can they do? They can make a huge difference just by honoring their parents and their grandparents.
Yes, yeah, and that is so true that kids do learn by example. And if we don't have those examples available in their sphere that they operate in on a regular basis or even just occasionally, they're
Yeah.
never going to know truly what it means when we talk about those things. I
Hmm.
always found that I had opportunity when I had opportunities, I would exchange those words like honor and respect whenever I saw something when
Yeah.
we were out in public, and I would relate those words with what was going on. So my kids all of a sudden internalized what that word meant.
Yes.
Instead of just, saying, well, this is what you need to do. And we're going to do a character study
Yeah.
and find all the verses in the Bible that, it doesn't become real until you live it.
Yeah.
And so I love
Absolutely.
that. And what an example, because it is not easy. You have those struggles and you have to work through them, and your kids are watching for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think also, I didn't see this till later on, but I think it's First Timothy 5:4. And I'm just going to pull it up really quickly, but it gives a command to grandchildren, and I think this is one of the few times where you see grandchildren referenced in the Bible. So it says, but if a widow has children or grandchildren, let them first learn to show godliness to their own household and to make some return to their parents, for this is pleasing in the sight of God. And that's something I saw later on. And I was like, oh, my parents are teaching me how to be godly. And this pleases
Right.
God, So I think there are not very many references that are just so direct. My kids, they have two grandmothers who are widows. And so this is a very direct command of what we can do to when we are being kind to their grandmas, when we are talking to them, when we are serving them, that is pleasing to God.
Right. Yeah. And so there's so much on the benefit side. So what do you think is at stake when we lose, or what we lose when we don't foster these intergenerational relationships?
Well, I mean, I think I like to tell people that you can be a great parent, but when you have a grandparent who is involved or another older adult, you are providing your child with an extra layer of love, attention, adoration, availability. I mean, availability is something that I don't have a lot of as a mom, right?
Right.
And so just having that extra layer there of knowing that somebody else cares about you that much. I mean, that is ultimately, there are studies done on what happens when a child has that love and attention. They thrive. They're able to be more confident. And so, if we as parents know how to do that and can help the kids connect, we can provide them with that extra layer of support. I think the other thing is we allow our kids to see they see an example of of life in a long-term perspective. And kids often see things from like, tomorrow, I want that candy now. I need to buy that thing on Amazon right now. Please, let's go get it. But when you have a grandparent, even if it's a grandparent who is maybe not a great example, maybe they didn't live their lives in a way that just didn't make great choices, right? We can even just talk with our kids and help them to learn from a real life example of what happens when you make certain choices. Like maybe you have a parent you don't talk to that often because maybe that parent's disrespectful. And maybe they don't have a lot of friends. Well, you don't need to talk bad about them, but you can talk about how those choices affect them now. And it can be just a talking point and they see it. It's not you just spouting out knowledge. It's you showing them a real life example. And I think that's when it starts to really connect too.
Absolutely. Yes. And yeah, because we think life is gonna, it's at the here and now. We often don't think about what the consequences are as we live and older generations, they show us real life examples. And I think that's why we love biographies, reading them about people, because we realize that, life can take twists and turns that we are not expecting. And how great to have those people that our kids know and they have relationships with, even if they're minimal, like you talked about. Those are real people. They aren't just somebody you see on TV and you wonder, is this real or not? That's something you live out alongside them, and how beautiful that is as a true testimony of how God works in and through all circumstances.
Yeah.
Sure.
I think it's sometimes, especially if it's a nurturing grandparent, right? I think they don't have to be best friends with your child, and your child may not appreciate them, but having them there still matters. And that's what it was like for me. My grandparents, it's not like I wanted to be best friends with them when I was in middle school. I wanted to be popular among my peers, but just knowing that there was always, I knew that somebody thought the world of me, right? That did make a difference. And I think that's how it was with God sometimes, right? We're like, no, God, I don't want that. I want to be popular among all these people. So yes, you always have time for me, but no, I don't want that right now. But they're waiting there, right? And they're like, when you want time with me, I've got time for you. And so it has been really, I feel like spending time with my grandparents and other older adults has really helped me understand the way that God delights in us and looks at us.
So true. That's beautiful. Yeah, and our kids are missing out
Mhm.
if they don't have that, because we as parents, we get busy, and
Absolutely.
we can't provide that. We want to, but that comes for the next generation when we're grandparents. I'm waiting
Exactly.
on
Oh, yeah.
that. So, yeah. Well, what are some of the most common barriers you see families struggle with when trying to build bridges between children and older relatives?
I think there's often a lot of baggage between, adult children and their parents. And so sometimes they
Yeah.
don't want to help connect their kids to the grandparents. It's hard.
Yeah.
Maybe they have been hurt by their parents. And so I like to say that grandchildren bless without baggage. So if you have a difficult relationship, sometimes just connecting the grandkids who are often completely unaware of all the
Right.
baggage, they haven't felt it, right? And so I think that is definitely a barrier. I think distance is a barrier. Like I said, I think they speak different languages and
Yes.
have different experiences. And I often think it's just not parents not having the resources. So there's parenting resources on everything. But when it
Yeah.
comes to helping your kids connect with their grandparents, that's something that parents are like, just go talk to your grandparent, or how come you can't be kind to her? And we just kind of expect it, but we forget that sometimes it takes really being intentional.
Right. Yes, absolutely. And I love that, you talked about the tension between the parents and grandparents, and
Hmm.
how kids, they don't always, they don't have to know, everything that you're struggling with your own parent. I mean, they probably sense it somewhat,
Yes. Hmm.
the strain, but just to know that that person wants to be involved in their life, and wants to be there for them. That's huge.
Yeah. I don't
For
think it
sure.
has to. I think a lot of times parents, we think that it has to happen in a certain way. Like we need to take vacations together. We need to spend a lot of time together. And
Right.
really, I think of like the five love languages, or there's different ways to love, and maybe you have a difficult relationship. Sending a card does not mean you have to spend a lot of time with a
Right.
person, right? If that
Mhm.
relationship is not a pretty relationship, then maybe you'd use a different way to express that love. It could be sending pictures
Right.
or, and so I think it's about learning, being creative, because honoring your parents, it is going to require understanding them better so that you can connect with them. So we as parents have to understand how to do that first.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, yeah, but just opening the door.
Yeah,
That
opening the door.
that's what we need to do. So there's lots of sticky situations, situations with in-laws that are
Hmm.
strained, or grandparent relationships. How can parents navigate gently, while encouraging that bond? Any
Yeah.
suggestions?
I mean, this could be a really long conversation, right? Um, I think that if it's a difficult relationship, I think it's things like doing counseling, or just processing your own emotions and how you feel about this
Right.
relationship first is really necessary. Because otherwise, you take that baggage and it just gets really messy, right? And
Right.
so I think that is often what happens. And I think especially for like moms of young kids, we are so bombarded that sometimes we're not able to process. And so
Right.
that's why we get into situations where we may say things that we shouldn't say, and we have not
Absolutely.
processed what has happened, right? And so I think it just starts with first processing, how do I feel about this relationship? And
Right.
then you can move on to the next step of what can I do? Like what is within my range that I can do to be able to connect with them, and just be intentional about it. Because I think,
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be a lot of quantity time, but I think being quality time. So if you are only going to
Yes.
see the in-laws
Love that.
twice a year, what can we do to show that we want to get to know them, or that we know them? Like
Right.
what do they like to do? And so even if it's telling the kids, this is the only 2 times a year we're going to see them. And we want to make sure that we do something that we can spend time together. And they like to do this, so we're going to do this too.
Right.
And that's really why I created the Grandkid Investigator Kit, is because I feel like parents are too busy sometimes and need that support in helping to foster that conversation and that relationship. Sometimes I think grandparents need it too. Sometimes they don't know what to say.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's hard. Like you were talking earlier about the different languages almost that generation speak, and just understanding. I mean, I teach 11, 12-year-olds, and some of the words I'm like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
I'm just old. I'm sorry. You got to explain this to me, girls. But
Exactly.
That's so true. As you were talking, it was reminding me of a conversation that I recorded probably about a year and a half ago with one of my co-hosts, Leilani Melendez. And it was all about her dying to the fact that her mother-in-law really wanted to help her homeschool, and her thinking, my mother-in-law can't do this right. And so she kept pushing her and pushing her out of her life until her daughter with Down syndrome was born and needed so many heart surgeries that she actually had to be at the hospital, and her grandma or her mother-in-law had to take over. And she said, and now I'm embracing, even though we don't agree on everything, the beauty of what she adds to my children's lives, that things that I would never even do. But I think we have to be willing to embrace that difference, as especially since this is her mother-in-law, so a different culture.
Yeah.
And so somebody that you aren't used to relating to as much as maybe your own parent. And so it takes a lot of work.
It does take a lot of work.
Sure.
I think
Yeah.
it's about letting go of that. I think so many times our expectation of what a good relationship with the grandparents looks like is not realistic. And in reality, it is going to get messy at times. It's a relationship, right?
Right. Exactly.
But I do think that, my background is a lot in senior care, and I worked in hospice care for about 8 or 9 years. So end of life care. And so when it comes down to it, like, parents they're in the sandwich generation. And so when you can teach the young and the old to connect together, it makes your life less stressful, because too often I see adult children who they try to take everything on. They try to take on what their kids need, what their parent or in-law needs. And realistically, we cannot take everything in, right? I think kids are powerful in improving the quality of life of an older person as they age. And when they boost the mood, which they are so good at doing,
exactly,
they're actually making their grandparents healthier. And so we need them to be in that. Sometimes we think that we're the ones who can solve all the problems, but I really do think that kids, they bring their own specialty. Like, they have a superpower, I say.
Yeah.
And they can do very small gestures that mean so much to an older person, to their grandparent. Even if they call and ask their grandparent, let's say every month, if they called their grandparent every month and talked to them for 2 minutes or even 1 minute and said, Grandma, how you doing? I mean, do you know how much that would just, I mean, a grandparent would be beaming and bragging about how their grandchild checks up on them. It's only 12 times a year. That's 24 minutes in a whole year, And so I think it can be really fun for kids too, when they realize that they can have that impact.
So true. Yes. And it's amazing to watch kids and an older generation. My students perform at a retirement community, and when we come there to perform, there's 80 people sitting. We never have an audience of 80 people when we perform out in public. And these older adults, they just dote on my girls. They remember their last performance, and they're like, oh, you're getting so much better, and how good to hear that, not just from their parents, not just from other people, but from people who are sitting there intentionally watching. And so there's so much that comes out of that, because they are speaking from a place of, I've seen a lot, in my life, and here, look at what you're doing. And it takes on a different level of compliment. And also when those kids sit around and chat afterwards, how filling that is for that generation to say, oh, these kids value what I think,
Yeah.
and a lot of times the older generations are forgotten in our society today, and how sad that is.
Absolutely. I totally agree.
Yeah. So, what are some tangible ways parents can help children appreciate, respect, and connect with their grandparents or other elders? Can you share like a couple strategies?
Sure. So I think a huge one is just prompting them. Prompting them when it comes to conversation. Let's say they're going to see their grandparents, they're going to see another older adult. Tell them what to say. When
Yeah.
it comes to if a child has autism, a lot of times we need to guide them. They don't know what to say, and so telling them, when you see grandma, say good morning, or ask her
Right.
how her day was. Say, how are you doing today, or what did you do today? And that just goes such a long way. And I think sometimes we forget that they might not know what to say. And
Right.
I really believe that kids, they do care oftentimes, but they don't know what to do. Like I said, they speak a different language. So teaching them how to speak that language. If the grandparent is coming out of the car, telling them, go outside and help grandma, ask her, do you need help with anything? And just prompting them to do those things, so that it's just a very simple gesture, but it teaches them how to be able to support and serve and connect. That's a first
Yes.
thing. I think I always say, when you ask them, you honor them. So when you ask a grandparent questions, you honor them. In
True.
my Grandkid Investigator Kit, I have missions that I assign to kids. And basically each of the missions is, you're asking questions to the grandparent and asking them everything from, it's not just about their history, but it's also asking things like, what kind of things do you like to eat? Do you like to eat out more, or do you like to eat in the house? Do you
Right.
like sweet or salty? And when you ask them things, they're like, oh, wow, I feel seen. Most of the time,
Right.
grandparents are the ones
Exactly.
who are asking the grandchildren questions. But when are they asked questions, right? So not
Right.
only can we ask them about things about themselves now to get to know them, but we can have our kids ask them about the past too. But there's just so much rich
Yes.
conversation that is it's a fun learning experience for kids, I think, when they
Yeah.
learn these new things about their grandparents that they never knew.
Absolutely. Yes. Because when we get to our age and we've lost parents, grandparents,
Hmm.
we always wish, oh, if I had only asked them, if I'd only known
Hmm.
that, these were the things that I wanted to know about them then. And those kids can look back and say, I did ask those questions. I do know those answers, and
Hmm.
how powerful that is to have been connected.
Yeah.
So,
Hmm.
what does this look like for younger kids versus teens?
Well, I think when kids are younger, you can just kind of take them along with you, right?
Right.
When it comes to an older child, a teen, I find that there's more talking, maybe less prompting, but more helping them to understand a situation. So they may see grandma not, let's say a grandparent has Alzheimer's. You may need to define what Alzheimer's is for them and explain to them certain things. And so just
Yes.
providing a space and saying it's okay to ask questions. I think kids are inquisitive, they are curious, but sometimes they may sense that it is rude to ask a question, or and
Yes.
so I think we need to explain to them, even if a lot of times they're going to be in a different setting. There's a tube across her nose. That's a little scary. And they may step back because they don't feel comfortable. Maybe they think that their grandparent may die if they get too close and they do something. So I think we need
Right.
to really explain things, because they are at the point where they're learning and they are soaking things in, and they are interested. I mean, the greatest thing about homeschooling is that you can teach your kids while you are living life. And I think you're
Yeah.
going to do the same thing when they are visiting grandparents, when they're around grandparents. With younger kids, I think you can I say, bring the fun in, especially. I used to have like a lollipop strategy, I would say. I would tell my kids, anytime we go to visit the nursing home, that's when we get to eat a lollipop. And just connecting things that they really enjoy with visiting an older person or visiting grandparents.
That's great. Yes, because it just boosts that memory to be something even more enjoyable. It's not so much a bribe, but it's
No.
like creating the atmosphere of that visit. I love
Yes.
that.
And helping them,
Yes.
encouraging them to do it. Just like if you need your kid to do piano lessons and practice, you may say, after you finish practicing, we're going to go out and play basketball, or we're going to go do this. It's the same type of thing.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So you touched a little bit about autism, and many in our community are homeschooling kids who are neurodivergent, have ADHD on the spectrum, other things. What advice do you have for helping these kids who have those specific struggles or areas of struggle with intergenerational relationships in a way that honors the differences?
Well, this could be a whole nother topic, but I would say I feel like when when we allow our kids who have special needs and we put them in these environments, I think they actually thrive, because it's not a sit down environment where they have to sit at a seat. I mean,
Yeah.
I have brought kids into a nursing home crying, and all the heads start popping up. Everybody starts looking. And I think that, there's a lot of grace for our kids when
Yes.
they are with their grandparents or other older adults. And so I think this is actually the perfect setting.
Mm.
I have brought, a student to go do the Grandkid Investigator Kit with a resident at a nursing home who the child didn't know. And they're just conversations, yes, sometimes a child with ADHD may be impulsive, but the things that they say are going to make this older person laugh. So I remember,
Right.
we were doing a
So true.
mission, and this boy, he was I think he was about 12, and he was trying to write down what, he asked a question. He was trying to write down what this older woman was saying. And he said, "Wait, you're going too fast," because he couldn't keep up and he was really working hard to write. And he said, "You're
Right.
too athletic." And she goes, "I haven't been called athletic in a while. That's kind of nice." And he said, "Oh, you still got it in you, And so I
Oh.
feel like just those conversations where in typical
Right.
situations,
Mm-hmm.
maybe it would be a little like blurting out things would not work. I mean, in a setting with older people, yes, they're often forgotten, especially if
Yes.
you're talking about an assisted living or a nursing home. And so any type of interaction is a blessing to them.
Mhm.
So that's why I love, I think these kids where they might not fit in other situations, this is their place. This is their
Yeah,
place.
I
They are
truly believe
going to
that.
be,
Yes.
these residents are going to look forward to seeing them. Their
Mm.
older friends are going to love that. Yeah, maybe they speak louder and,
Right.
yeah, but it's totally okay.
Mhm.
And we
They'll just
had
turn their hearing aid down.
Exactly. We had a child who was autistic and was doing this Grandkid Investigator thing in an assisted living, and he afterwards he ended up going to do something else. He wanted to play the piano, then he wanted to play a game, and it was like these are okay. It's okay to do that,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
It's okay if you get distracted. Just that personal interaction is just such a gift. So I
Yes.
think, even if you don't have a grandparent
Mhm.
who's living close, connecting with a senior living community is just a great idea.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about that? So my mom used to be a volunteer coordinator at an
Oh, cool.
a nursing home when I was growing up. And so we would always go in and volunteer as kids. It was right down the street from our house. Um, now I know how to interact with, but I think a lot of people feel like, well, how do I even get in the doors,
Hmm.
as somebody. So what is your advice for like contacting a place that an elder care home or an assisted living to start those types of interactions?
Yeah. So, I mean, every single one runs a little differently. And I will say that if you visit on a more regular basis, then if it is a nursing home, then sometimes they have requirements in terms of like you've got to fill out certain paperwork to make sure that you meet certain regulations. Assisted living is a lot less regulated in that way. So it might be good to start with an assisted living. But if you know somebody, let's say at your church, you know an older person, then you could just visit them. Um,
Right.
and you can talk to the volunteer coordinator if you don't know anybody there, but if you know somebody there, I would start with that.
Yeah.
And then I mean, my go-to right now, like I said, I keep mentioning this is my Grandkid Investigator Kit. I have different missions, and I would just give the child a mission each time because it gives them something to focus on. I think sometimes us as parents, we feel a little nervous about bringing our kids because, like, what's going to happen, But if you have something, it could be, um, just giving them a task. Like today, we're just going to go bring something that you made, a piece of art, and we're just going to
Right.
visit them and hang it up. It doesn't even have to be a long visit. But just the more that you reach out, I think you learn like what
Right.
that person is like. So it is just kind of starting.
Yeah.
And if that assisted living or nursing home is not as receptive or it's harder to get in, go call another one. There are
Yes.
senior living places all over, and a
Yep.
lot of them are so happy, even if it's like going to play piano or singing a song.
Yeah.
It
Yep.
could be a 5-minute song and you could be done and they'd be so thankful.
Yes, absolutely. I agree. There's so many around our area, and they're always thankful when
Hmm.
somebody comes in.
Absolutely.
Um, so tell us about the Grandkid Investigator Initiative and what inspired it, and what did you learn through launching it?
Yeah, so in 2023, I've been doing a lot of things with caregiving, but I had written my book, The Value of Wrinkles, A Young Perspective on How Loving the Old Will Change Your Life. And I realized, I care about the older generation. I benefit so much. But what about my kids? I don't think they're going to live with their grandparents, and they don't work in senior care, and I can't guarantee that they're going to get the same experience as me. So I
Right.
wanted to help them. How do I intentionally help them? Or how do I help them to connect with their grandmothers and other older adults? And how do I make it fun? Because, my
Right.
kids are going to be the hardest on me. If I do anything, they're going to say, "That's not fun. That's boring, mom." And so
Right.
I started, I was like, you know what would be really cool? If kids could investigate, because there's so many cool things that I have learned about older people and my grandparents. If they could just use those questions that they ask me all the
Right.
time, and we could just
Yeah.
transfer those questions, that curiosity, to their grandmothers.
Yeah.
And so I created different missions that all had to do with a different topic, and they have a mission plan and they had to complete different missions. All of them are prompted, and so they were able to learn about all different areas. So we had Operation Marshmallow, which was learning about their food preferences, and they found out
Okay.
that my mom is actually very picky. um, we did Operation Time Travel, which is like a Mad Libs type thing where they found out the silly
Ah,
story, and then
uh-huh.
there is the second part is the real story. So they asked and learned about their childhood home. One of the kids, and when I did this with other kids, one of the kids found out that their grandma played with tarantulas and spiders growing up. I mean, like, who
Wow.
needs toys? You can play with, and
Right.
so I feel like what happened was I got really excited because kids were enjoying talking to their grandparents. They were finding out really cool facts, which is what they love to find out. Like, they weren't
Yeah.
necessarily reading a memoir or anything, but they were finding out cool facts that helped them realize that, wow, if I ask my grandparent more stories, they've got a lot that they've done.
Right.
And then what I realized that I got really excited about was grandparents just loved this because this was the first time that the grandkids were initiating in
Right.
this relationship. Grandparents are usually the ones who are initiating. And so um, I am still learning from this, but I'm realizing that this is something that families do want. I mean, I just did an event at YMCA, at Chick-fil-A in the past 2 weeks, and people are like, "Oh, wow, this is really neat." And I just really believe that parents need help, grandparents need help in connecting, the kids need
absolutely.
help, and I want to make it fun. So I've realized the importance of all of those things.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, and how fun that, they're engaging in it, and it is probably spurring on even more conversations than what was in the pack
Absolutely.
itself. Yeah.
But it just prompts them and just gets that conversation started. You know, it helps them feel comfortable with each other.
Right. And so, yeah, as far as like kids that are shy or disconnected or kind of feel awkward, does it seem to like alleviate all of those fears and anxieties that because they have all of that prompting and they're equipped with what to go in with?
Yeah, I think it takes away the uncertainty of what are we going to talk about. And instead, their
Yeah.
minds are focused on, okay, what's the first mission? And then let me check this off and let me find out what the next mission is. And oh, I got to find out about this. So it kind of diverts the attention away from, okay, I just got to figure out what to say to them.
Right. Yeah.
And so I think it is nice to have that guidance.
Yeah, so true. And especially for kids that do have high anxiety
Hmm.
or that do have autism, having things scripted is
Exactly.
is so much easier, and it does allow for that free talk afterwards when they become interested,
Hmm.
but just that launching place because it's so much in our life, fear and anxiety can halt us,
Yeah.
and how great for kids to see that they can push past that. And the
Hmm.
more that they do that, the rewards that come on the other side, especially relational rewards, which
Yeah.
our kids don't get a lot of. It's like more of like, we'll give you, a treat, or we'll give you this. But those are those internal things that they're really longing for more so than anything else.
Yeah, actually, so when I did in 2023 is when it started with a Grandkid Investigator camp I did via Zoom. And the funny thing is when I asked the kids, what did you enjoy most about this? I thought I gave them prizes because I was really afraid. Are they going to
Yeah.
want to do this? Like, I need to motivate them somehow.
Right.
And the response I got was, I liked asking my grandparent questions. And it kind of shocked me. It shouldn't have shocked me, but
Wow.
it kind of shocked me
Yeah.
because I was like, "Oh, they got to find out some neat things." It was the relational reward that they enjoyed.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that was yeah, that was a gift to be able to see that.
Oh, truly. Yes. And for so many families, that's a gift they never receive
Mhm.
because we just don't know how to initiate it, and it feels awkward, or we've got those roadblocks that we've talked about earlier, and so there just seems so many things, and we don't feel equipped as parents to do that.
Mhm.
So thank you for what you're doing. What are some small steps that families can take, maybe even this week, to help their kids feel more connected and supported through relationships with others?
Okay. I think we can just talk about their grandparents. I think sometimes they don't even think about their grandparents. It's just not even on
Oh
their
yeah.
mind, right? So one of the things I like to do is if our kids are talking about my son wants to go fishing, I can say, well, did you know that gong gong, which is grandpa in Chinese, you know that he liked to fish a lot? And so sometimes it's just mentioning them
Yeah.
and talking about them and then actually reaching out is the next step, or
Right.
maybe the next time they see their grandpa, then you can say, I was telling Bobby that you like to fish a lot or you used to fish a lot, like, remember that fish that you caught and blah, 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 blah. That's what happened. So you're really,
Right.
I think it starts with just talking and showing that you yourself are thinking about them.
Yes. Yeah. And that making that connection on both sides
Hmm.
so that
Hmm.
it's easy for both of them to come into a conversation versus, well, you should talk to grandpa about this, and not kind of lead that conversation for both of them to, and because at that point, from what you had just said, how easy it is to then continue the conversation
Mm-hmm.
versus just saying, well, go chat with them about that. Or maybe the next time we visit, you can ask them about it and then you forget.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, but to have that
Exactly.
on the front of your mind for sure. So if a parent's listening and thinking, this sounds wonderful, but how do I begin? Tell us about your website and your book,
Sure.
and how parents can get connected with your resources so that so they can get the help that you have to offer.
Sure. So I have my website is valueofwrinkles.com. And if parents wanted to try out a free mission, they can go to valueofwrinkles.com/free mission, and they'll get a free mission from the kit to try out. And I think especially if they're homeschooling, this is the kit. I have it in digital form, and really it's like a curriculum that you would work through. It's like a mission plan, and I think it's a great thing to just like assign kids and give them a task each week and say, your goal is to do a mission every week. And that's part of, you put it into the lesson plan. It is educational. They're learning social skills. They are, Operation Time Travel is essentially a Mad Libs where they're learning parts of speech and things like that. And
Right. Yeah.
so, I would recommend making it fun and starting there.
Yeah, that's great. And then your book, what is that's also the
The
value of
Value of
wrinkles.
Wrinkles, A Young Perspective on How Loving the Old Will Change Your Life. That book is really a story, I say, of how I went from being grumpy to being grateful for my grandparents. It's like a guidebook for grandkids and adult children on how to value the older people in your life. And I think,
Hmm.
I think it's enjoyable. That's my that's my perspective. But it's filled with a lot of stories of me growing up, but also even my kids, my nieces and nephews with their great grandma, and really, it's very practical. Is the feedback I've gotten.
That's great. Well, thank you for, just investing the time into making those resources. And I'm sure they're valuable to many and hopefully many more to come, especially those of you listening today. Just encourage you to check out Isabel's website and her book. These are relationships that are so important and so forgotten in our generation. So Isabel, just thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your heart and your wisdom. Your insights remind us that when we take the time to really nurture those relationships between our kids and those older generations, we're just building lasting support systems for both them, ourselves, as like you said, the sandwich generation, and also just allowing the wisdom that they've learned over their lives to be poured into the next generation. Too often that gets lost. So, so thank you for teaching us and informing us how to do that.
Well, thanks for having me. I really enjoyed this chat.
Absolutely. And for those of you that are listening, I encourage you to check out Isabel's book, The Value of Wrinkles, and her website. All of those links will be shared in the show notes, so don't worry about trying to spell them out or find them. We'll put those links there for you. And then on Isabel's website, thevalueofwrinkles.com, the Grandkid Investigator Kit is right on there, so you can check that out, as well as that freebies link to try that one curriculum and see how it goes. I'm excited to hear what you guys learned through that and through Isabel's tools. So make sure to mention them in the comments. We would love to pass those along to Isabel, or just send her a message and let her know just how her work is affecting your family. That's always encouraging to people creating resources, just letting them know that how they have encouraged your homeschool walk, your parenting walk, and all that. So, as always, if you're looking for encouragement and resources to support your homeschooling journey, especially if you're navigating learning struggles or unique challenges, visit Homeschool Heroes at spedhomeschool.com. You're not alone. We're here to walk with you. Until next time, remember, you're part of a community that values connection, growth, and grace in every season of homeschooling, and we are cheering you on. So thanks, everybody. God bless, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
This has been Empowering Homeschool Conversations, provided by SPED Homeschool, a nonprofit that empowers families to home educate diverse learners. To learn more, visit spedhomeschool.com.